Hi guys. Alright, so I'm going to be reading the first half of chapter 4 today. It starts on page 66. Okay, so this kind of chapter is all about Crooks, the stable buck. Here we go. So Crooks, the Negro stable buck, had his bunk in the harness room, a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. On one side of the little room there was a square four-paned window, and on the other a narrow plank door leading into the barn. Crooks's bunk was a long box filled with straw, on which his blankets were flung. On the wall by the window, there were pegs on which hung broken harness in process of being mended, strips of new leather, and under the window itself, a little bench for leather working tools, curved knives and needles, and balls of linen thread, and a small hand riveter. On pegs were also pieces of harness, a split collar with the horsehair stuffing sticking out, a broken hame, and a trace chain with its leather covering split. So remember, because he is the guy that tends the horses and takes care of the animals. So pretty much all the stuff inside his room has to do with taking care of horses. Crooks had his apple box over his bunk, and in it a range of medicine bottles, both for himself and for the horses. There were cans of saddle soap and a drippy can of tar, with its paintbrush sticking over the edge. And scattered about the floor were a number of personal possessions. For being alone, Crooks could leave his things about, and being a stable buck and a cripple, he was more permanent than the other men, and he had accumulated more possessions than he could carry on his back. So all the other guys pretty much stay in the same bunkhouse. Crooks stays in a separate place. He doesn't really leave the ranch like the other men kind of come and go. He's more permanent there. Crooks possessed several pairs of shoes, a pair of rubber boots, a big alarm clock, and a single-barreled shotgun. And he had books too, a tattered dictionary and a mauled copy of the California Civil Code for 1905. There were battered magazines and a few dirty books on a special shelf over his bunk. A pair of large gold-rimmed spectacles hung from a nail on the wall above his bed. This room was swept and fairly neat, for Crooks was a proud, aloof man. So, being aloof, he doesn't really like to associate himself with the other guys on the ranch. He's kind of a loner. He kept his distance and demanded that other people keep theirs. His body was bent over to the left by his crooked spine, and his eyes lay deep in his head, and because of their depth seemed to glitter with intensity. His lean face was lined with deep black wrinkles, and he had thin, pain-tightened lips, which were lighter than his face. It was Saturday night. Through the open door that led into the barn came the sound of moving horses, of feet stirring, of teeth champing on hay, of the rattle of halter chains. In the stable buck's room, a small electric globe threw a meager yellow light. Crooks sat on his bunk. His shirt was out of his jeans and back. In one hand, he held a bottle of liniment, and with the other, he rubbed his spine. So it's kind of like medicine for if your bones ache or if you're having pains on your body. It's something like a lotion that you could rub on it that makes it feel better. Now and then, he poured a few drops of the liniment into his pink-palmed hand and reached up under his shirt to rub again. He flexed his muscles against his back and shivered. Noiselessly, Lenny appeared in the open doorway and stood there looking in, his big shoulders nearly filling the opening. For a moment, Crooks did not see him, but on raising his eyes, he stiffened and a scowl came on his face. His hand came out from under his shirt. Lenny smiled helplessly in an attempt to make friends. Crooks said sharply, "You got no right to come in my room. This is my room. Nobody got any right in here but me." Okay, so why do you think that he probably feels that way? Well, I'll tell you. So pretty much, he feels this way because he is kind of singled out from all the other guys around the ranch, mainly because of his race. So they don't, we talked about before, they don't even call him by his name. They call him the stable buck, which is his job, or racial slurs. So he feels not only he wants nothing to do with these guys because he's not one of them. He's not he doesn't buck barley like they do, but he feels cut off from them because they've made him feel different. He feels, being that he's a different race, he's not really a part of who they are. And so Lenny's kind of just hanging out in his doorway, and he's like, yeah, get out of here. Just for someone being white already, he kind of just wants nothing to do with them from all the racism that he's experienced. Lenny gulped and his smile grew more fawning. "I ain't doing nothing," he said. "Just come to look at my puppy, and I seen your light," he explained. "Well, I got a right to have a light. You go on and get out of my room. I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse, and you ain't wanted in my room." "Why ain't you wanted?" Lenny asked. "'Cause I'm black. They play cards in there, but I can't play because I'm black. They say I stink. Well, I tell you, all you stink to me. Lenny flapped his big hands helplessly. Everybody went into town, he said. So Lenny can't really understand what he's talking about at all. Like, he has no idea about racism or anything. He just kind of wants to talk to someone because he wants a friend. Slim and George and everybody. George says I gotta stay here and not get in no trouble. I seen your light. Well, what do you want? Nothing. I seen your light. I thought I could just come in and sit. Crooks stared at Lenny, and he reached behind him and took down the spectacles and adjusted them over his pink ears and stared again. I don't know what you're doing in the barn anyway, he complained. You ain't no Skinner. There's no call for a bucker to come into the barn at all. You ain't no Skinner. You ain't got nothing to do with the horses. The pup, Lenny repeated. I come to see my pup. Well, go and see your pup then. Don't come in a place where you're not wanted. Lenny lost his smile. He advanced a step into the room, then remembered and back to the door again. I looked at him a little. Slim says I ain't to pet him very much. Crooks said, well, you've been taking him out of the nest all the time. I wonder the old lady don't move him someplace else, meaning the mom dog. Oh, she don't care. She lets me. Lenny had moved into the room again. George scowled, but Lenny's disarming smile defeated him. Come on in and sit a while, Crooks said. Long as you won't get out and leave me alone, you might as well sit down. His tone was a little more friendly. All the boys gone into town, huh? So, okay, he ends up inviting Lenny in because despite the fact that he's very wary of white people and wary of other guys that work on the ranch, he's also very alone. That's kind of something in common that a lot of the guys on this ranch in this book have. Nobody really has anyone except for Lenny and George. And so Crooks feels completely by himself. He never has anyone that wants to hang out with him. Slim is pretty much the only person that's really nice to him or treats him well on the farm, on the ranch. So now that he sees Lenny's not there to be mean to him or make fun of him, he's like, all right, fine, and invites him in. All but old Candy. He just sits in the bunkhouse, sharpening his pencil and sharpening and figuring. Crooks adjusted his glasses. Figuring? What's Candy figuring about? Lenny almost shouted, about the rabbits! You're nuts, said Crooks. You're as crazy as a wedge. What rabbits you talking about? The rabbits we're gonna get, and I get to tend them, cut grass and give them water and like that. Just nuts, said Crooks. I don't blame the guy you travel with for keeping you out of sight. Lenny said quietly, it ain't no lie. We're gonna do it. Gonna get a little place and live on the fat of the land. Crooks settled himself more comfortably on his bunk. Sit down, he invited. Sit down on the nail keg. Lenny hunched down on the little barrel. You think it's a lie, Lenny said, but it ain't no lie. Every word's the truth, and you can ask George. Crooks put his dark chin into his pink palm. You travel around with George, don't you? Sure. Me and him goes every place together. Crooks continued. Sometimes he talks, and you don't know what the hell he's talking about. Ain't that so? He leaned forward, boring Lenny with his deep eyes. Ain't that so? Yeah, sometimes. Just talks on and you don't know what the hell it's all about? Yeah, sometimes, but not always. Crooks leaned forward over the edge of his bunk. I ain't a Southern Negro, he said. I was born right here in California. My old man had a chicken ranch, about 10 acres. The white kids come to play at our place, and sometimes I want to play with them, and some of them was pretty nice. My old man didn't like that. I never knew till long later why he didn't like that, but I know now. He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. There wasn't another colored family for miles around. And now there ain't a colored man on this ranch, and there's just one family in Soledad. He laughed. If I say something, why, it's just a Negro saying it. Lenny asked, how long do you think it'll be before them pups will be old enough to pet? So Lenny, has no idea what he's talking about at all right now. He's just thinking about his puppy. Crooks laughed again. I can't talk to you and be sure you won't go blabbing. Couple of weeks and them pups will be all right. George knows what he's about. Just talks and you don't understand nothing. He leaned forward excitedly. This is just a Negro talking, and a busted back Negro. So it don't mean nothing, see? You couldn't remember it anyways. I seen it over and over. A guy talking to another guy, and it don't make no difference if you don't hear or understand. The thing is, they're talking, or their sentence still not talking. It don't make no difference. No difference. His excitement had increased until he pounded his knee with his hand. George could tell you screwy things, and it don't matter. It's just the talking. It's just being with another guy. That's all. He paused. Okay, so he's talking about the fact that he feels like he could say whatever he wants to Lenny right now because Lenny's not going to really fully understand what he's talking about or even remember probably everything he says. And he feels like he never has anybody to talk to. And he's saying that the party says, George can tell you whatever he wants. It doesn't matter. It's just the talking. It's just being with another guy. Like, he's saying, like, you have a companion. You have someone to talk to that cares about you, and I don't have that. His voice grew soft and persuasive. Suppose George don't come back no more. Suppose he took a powder and just ain't coming back. What'll you do then? Lenny's attention came gradually to what had been said. What? He demanded. I said, suppose George went into town tonight and you never heard of him no more. Crooks pressed forward some kind of private victory. Just suppose that, he repeated. He won't do it, Lenny cried. George wouldn't do nothing like that. I've been with George a long time. He'll come back tonight. But the doubt was too much for him. Don't you think he will? Crooks's face lighted with pleasure in his torture. So why do you... Okay, so he's talking like this and kind of being really mean to Lenny because it's almost like this is like the only person that he could take out his anger on and the injustice that he feels at always being excluded because of his race. So he feels like this guy that's coming into my room right now that doesn't know what I'm talking about, I could say whatever I want to him and I'm going to inflict some anger on him and release something that I have. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of blowing out someone's light to make yours shine brighter. That's exactly what's happening right now. He feels like Lenny's pretty much the only person that he could be mean to and not get anything back and like get away with it. So he's making him feel like, oh, what if George doesn't come back? What are you going to do about that? Crooks's face lighted with pleasure in his torture. Nobody can tell what a guy'll do, he observed calmly. Let's say he wants to come back and can't. Suppose he gets killed or hurt so he can't come back. Lenny struggled to understand. George won't do nothing like that, he repeated. George is careful. He won't get hurt. He ain't never been hurt because he's careful. Well, suppose he don't come back. What'll you do then? Lenny's face wrinkled with apprehension. I don't know. Say, what are you doing anyways? He cried. This ain't true. George ain't got hurt. Crooks bored in on him. Want me to tell you what'll happen? They'll take you to the booby hatch. They'll tie you up with a collar like a dog. Suddenly, Lenny's eyes centered and grew quiet and mad. He stood up and walked dangerously towards Crooks. Who hurt George? He demanded. Crooks saw the danger as it approached him. He edged back on his bunk to get out of the way. I was just supposing, he said. George ain't hurt. He's all right. He'll be back all right. Lenny stood over him. What are you supposing for? Ain't nobody gonna suppose no hurt to George. Crooks removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with his fingers. Just sit down, he said. George ain't hurt. Lenny growled back to his seat on the nail keg. Ain't nobody gonna talk no hurt to George, he grumbled. Crooks said gently, maybe you can see now. You got George. You know he's going to come back. Suppose you didn't have nobody. Suppose you couldn't go into the bunkhouse and play rummy because you was black. How'd you like that? Suppose you had to sit out here and read books. Sure, you could play horseshoes till it got dark, but then you gotta read books. Books ain't no good. A guy needs somebody to be near him. He whined. A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. Don't make no difference who the guy is, long as he's with you. I tell you, he cried. I tell you, a guy gets too lonely and he gets sick. George gonna come back, Lenny reassured himself in a frightened voice. Maybe George come back already. Maybe I better go see. Crooks said, I didn't mean to scare you. He'll come back. I was talking about myself. A guy sits alone out here at night, maybe reading books or thinking or stuff like that. Sometimes he gets thinking, and he's got nothing to tell him. He's got nothing to tell him what's so and what ain't so. Maybe if he sees something and he don't know whether it's right or not, he can't turn to some other guy and ask him if he sees it too. He can't tell. He got nothing to measure by. I seen things out here. I wasn't drunk. I don't know if I was asleep. If some guy was with me, he could tell me I was asleep, and then it would be all right. But I just don't know. Crooks was looking across the room now, looking toward the window. Letty said miserably, George won't go away and leave me. I know George won't do that. The stable buck went on dreamily. I remember when I was a little kid on my old man's chicken ranch. Had 2 brothers. They was always with me, always there. Used to sleep right in the same room, right in the same bed, all three. Had a strawberry patch. Had an alfalfa patch. Used to turn the chickens out in the alfalfa on a sunny morning. My brothers would set on a fence rail and watch him. White chickens they was. Gradually, Lenny's interest came around to what was being said. George says we're going to have alfalfa for the rabbits. What rabbits? We're going to have rabbits in a berry patch. You're nuts. We are too. You ask George. You're nuts, Cook said was scornful. I've seen hundreds of men come by on the road and on the ranches with their bindles on their backs and that same damn thing in their heads. Hundreds of them. They come and they quit and go on. And every damn one of them's got a little piece of land in his head. And never a goddamn one of them ever gets it. Just like heaven, everybody wants a little piece of land. I read plenty of books out here. Nobody never gets to heaven, and nobody gets no land. It's just in their head. They're all the time talking about it, but it's just in their head. He paused and looked toward the open door, for the horses were moving restlessly, and the halter chains clinked. A horse whinnied. I guess somebody's out there, Cook said. Maybe Slim. Slim comes in sometimes, 2-3 times a night. Slim's a real skinner. He looks out for his team. He pulled himself painfully upright and moved toward the door. That you, Slim? He called. Candy's voice answered. Slim went into town. Say, you seen Lenny? You mean the big guy? Yeah, seen him around any place? He's in here, Crook said shortly. He went back to his bunk and lay down. Candy stood in the doorway, scratching his bald wrist and looking blindly into the lighted room. He made no attempt to enter. Tell you what, Lenny, I've been figuring about them rabbits. Crook said irritably, you can come in if you want. Okay, so he's inviting Candy into for basically the same reason, that he really, other than Slim, he has no one to talk to ever. And so these are the only two guys that he has. Someone who's mentally handicapped and someone who is an old man with one hand that no one cares about either of those people. So he feels like he can be honest with them. All right, so I'm going to post this for Friday. So this is for Friday, which is I think the 20th. This is all you guys have to do is just watch this video and follow along in your books, and that's it. There you go.